All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'd like to call to order the May 27th Fire and Police Commission meeting for the city of Santa Barbara. Let's take a roll call. Carol, can you please start that?
Sure. Chair Stedman,
I'm here.
Vice Chair Rodriguez,
Here.
Commissioner Allman,
Here.
and Commissioner Travis Teague.
Here.
Okay, very well. All right, let's move on to item number 3. Are there any changes to today's agenda? Everybody's in accord. That's good. All right. Let's move on to item number 4, approval of the meeting minutes of April 22nd, 2021. Any of the commissioners have comments about those minutes?
No comments, but I'd move to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
I second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, moving right along. Excellent. Carol, do we have any hands raised for public comment?
Let's see, we do have some attendees. Anyone have their hand raised? No, I do not have. Let me just double check. Can only get this screen so big. No one has their hand raised to speak.
Okay, excellent.
Oh, and also, I'm sorry, I'll interrupt. We do have the email account now active, and I had checked that right before I logged on, and we do not have any comments via the email account.
Fantastic. All right, so we've got some momentum. Let's move on to item number 6, old business. Do any of the commissioners have any items they wish to have addressed? Okay. I don't see any activity. Vice Chair, no comments? All right, excellent. Let's move on to the police and fire liaison reports. Do you want to provide any comments, John, from the fire side?
Just that I've had some conversations with males over the last couple of days. And he'll speak to some of the issues that we talked about.
Okay. All right, great. So I guess we'll look forward to the fire chief's report. From the police liaison side, I did meet with Chief Malakian earlier in the week, and we had a brisk meeting, maybe 25 minutes. So we talked briefly about some topical items like use of force, succession, and I'll let the chief comment more on that. But according to our city administrator, I guess the official flyer has been prepared and published to begin the actual search for our next chief. So that's on the line. And then we also talked just briefly about allocation of current Santa Barbara Police Department resources throughout the city, how that's done. And that's really about it. Believe it or not, that consumed about 25 minutes of the chief's time earlier this week. So that's really all I have to report. Nothing groundbreaking. Again, just to recap that the future chief selection process is moving along. And again, I think maybe the chief will talk a little bit about use of force and allocation of current resources. So does anybody have any questions about that? All right. We're making great time here.
I don't have questions about that particular of the liaison report, but I do want to just be mindful that right now, all police functions are being looked at. And so I just want to make sure that we are being transparent and that we are following process in everything we do. So there was no official announcement that in this committee that Max had resigned, that we lost one of our commissioners. So that would have been nice to include so that it's in minutes, and any discussion about future liaison would be part of the public's, but the public is aware of that. So I'm just feeling a little uneasy that there was already a meeting, a liaison meeting with a chief without including the commission or making it known to the public that we lost a commissioner. So I just want to make sure that we're following process, and that we're being responsible to the public.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. Regardless of whether or not I was the liaison, I would still meet with the chief as the chair. So let's be clear on that process. And secondly, in terms of the resignation of Commissioner Peck, it was forwarded appropriately to the city clerk and the mayor of the city. So you were informed prior to this meeting. And now
I wasn't actually. I noticed that his name was off the agenda, and so then I asked
Right.
Carol. I noticed that, but there was no mention that I had to ask. So I just
Okay.
want to
Thank
be
you very much. So what is,
responsible and
okay,
very
if you,
we're serving the
settled-
public, and
if you
we are
settled
public
on-
servants. So
settled-
I just want to make sure we're following process, and I appreciate
Yeah.
that. Thank you.
thank you very much. Your appreciation is noted. Are there any other comments? Okay, great. Let's move on to the police department update. Item number 8. Chief?
Chair Stedman, members of the commission, thank you. Earlier this week, I sent out the annual tow fee report. There is, you'll see a comparison of different types of tows depending on vehicle size, ranging from motorcycles to heavy trucks. And you'll notice the different tow companies have rates set. There is no request for a rate change or a rate increase in this. In fact, you'll probably note that the police department rates are already slightly higher than everybody else's, all the other law enforcement agencies anyway. So I don't know if there's any questions on that. I was reminded that when I was on the commission about 7 years ago, I remember we did go through a discussion about rate changes, and it generated a lot of public comment, but there's no such proposal today. So I present it to you for your review.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate Officer Kamen putting together, the report. So is Officer Kamen suggesting that the current tow operators would like to see an increase?
No, Chair Stedman, I don't believe he is.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions about this particular report from the commission?
Chief,
Look,
question. It's new to me, this tow contract. I'm wondering,
Mr.
why are
Holman, I can't, you're breaking up a little bit.
I'm wondering why we're paying more than, say, the sheriff for a tow. I've got something going on.
I think you're
Not sure what's going on with my mic.
It's echoing a little bit.
Did you get any of that, Chief?
No, I did not. But whatever you did, it cleared it up, because when you asked me that question, it was clear, so. If you could repeat the question, that would be great.
I'm just wondering the difference in our rate, PD rate versus sheriff or PHP.
For the, if I understood, if I understood the question, you're asking how they compare?
Yes.
It varies from company to company, and I'm not quite sure why that is. But you will note that, for example, our rates are almost across the board the same or greater than the CHP, and the same or I'm trying to see which one is the sheriff. The sheriff used the one in Goleta. It's the same. For the lighter tows, it's the same as the sheriff as it gets heavier. Actually, Nevis Towing, Nevis and Smitty's are the two that tow in Goleta, and our rates are pretty much the same as the sheriff. There's a couple of places, and I don't know why, where the CHP and the sheriffs are a little higher than ours, particularly with Smitty's.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it looks like in Officer Kamen's report, he's referring to the last increase being at the county level. Is that right, Chief?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. So our rates have been pretty steady, and there were I'm not sure any of you were on the commission. I don't think you were on the commission at the time, Vice Chairman, but there was a lot of activity surrounding this particular agenda item, especially right after the Thomas fire, because we had a lot of different violations in the yards, and there was a lot of activity concerning not only the schedule, but more frequent reporting. So I appreciate the production of this report. We haven't seen it. We skipped it last year, which is fine, but everybody on the commission should realize that, it's our responsibility to set these rates, really, to approve any requests. So it looks like Officer Kamen has gone out to survey the current operators to see if they have any suggestions. Is that right, Chief?
Correct.
Okay. So we don't have that information yet, commissioners, but, if anybody has any strong oversight they want to apply, or if they think that it, needs to be presented to us in more detail than this report, then now's the time to provide that input. It's a lot of minutia, so always revisit this item, but if you're familiar with the report and it looks okay to you, is there a motion to accept this report from Officer Kamen?
If I, Chair Stedman, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely, John.
Afternoon, Chair Commissioners. We can absolutely do that, accept the report. If we're going to, I think it's fair for the toll rates in the public, if you're going to set permanent toll rates, I would just move that to the next meeting, so that specifically, that action is specifically agendized by the commission. That way, the toll operators, members of the public, can attend. So receiving the report and it's included as part of the package is great. If you want to take that extra step, we can move that forward. But you bring a good idea in terms of making comments, questions, if they need to bring back for the following time, it's appropriate time to do so now.
Yeah, that's absolutely what I'm trying to do, John, and I appreciate that further context, because most of the current commission hasn't really dealt with this issue before. So, now is really the time to take a look at these numbers, commissioners, and if you want to accept this report, I just want to get that extra step in there. But certainly, we're not going to take any action to change these rates unless it's officially on the agenda.
Chair Stedman, I'll interrupt. We do have somebody with their hand raised to discuss on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely, Carol.
Okay. Mr. Voigt, I'm going to unmute you. You can go ahead and speak. Mr. Voigt? Oh, sorry. You're logged in twice. And you might be self-muted on the other one. Mr. Voigt? Okay, Mr. Voigt? I'm not getting him, so,
Well,
Oh.
if he returns, Carol, we can
Sure.
certainly
Great.
let him speak during staff communications. But to any of the commissioners, I mean, at first glance, when you're looking at this report, does anything jump off the page? Is there anything that you would like the police department to drill down on before we actually move forward to hear in the future any input from the operators themselves regarding tow increases? Okay. All right. I would like to move to accept the report as presented to us by Officer Kamen via the chief. Do we have a second?
A second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Did Diane, Commissioner Travis Teague, did you have the opportunity to vote?
I did, and I said aye. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Okay. All right, great. All right. Thanks a lot for your comments too, John. Much appreciated. Let's move on then.
I had a couple of other items.
Continue with the chief. Yeah, to continue with the chief's report.
Thank you. First, and I know Chief Mills will go into it in more detail, but last Thursday night, we responded to the Loma fire. There were 34, ultimately there were 34 officers from the police department and approximately 25 sheriff's deputies who responded to assist with evacuations and traffic control. The chief Mills and I did pretty extensive presentation, both at the 2 o'clock session of City Council and again at 6 o'clock. The issues I think that are probably of most interest to the community from at least from the law enforcement side, there are a couple of things that made this fire very unique. One is how fast it exploded and started up. And equally impressive and impactful was how quickly the fire department put it down. Those of you that looked out your window as I did at about 9:10 on Thursday night and saw that whole mountain look like it was on fire, you'd have told me that was going to be pretty much knocked down by less than 3 hours later. I would have thought you were not dealing with a full deck, but they did a great job. It created some interesting issues, though. The evacuations went well. We essentially did door to door. We did not. The fire had exploded so quickly that we had 10 two-person teams of officers out knocking on doors, primarily between the 400 and 800 block of Miramonte. We anticipate that we estimate rather that we were probably knocked on 50 doors and would evacuate people, although quite frankly, most people were aware and had self-evacuated anyway. The challenge, and I want to take a minute to talk about the difference between messaging and alerting and talk to the commission about how this works. In the case of a fire, obviously it's the fire department's responsibility to fight the fire. And part of that effort, and I'm sure the chief will go into it a little bit more detail, is to essentially draw a box around what we think is the area being affected by the fire. It's then up to the police department to conduct the evacuations and to do any alerting or messaging to people that are involved. And alerting refers to whether we do it by knocking on doors or by Everbridge or by other social media or standing in front of a TV camera, is to direct people to take a specific action, usually to leave. That's alerting. Messaging is where you provide a broader audience, usually outside the box, with an explanation about what it is that's going on so that they can make a decision on their own. And in this case, and I said this publicly the other night, in looking back, I think, I think quite frankly, the officers and people who responded did an extraordinary job, as did the fire department. But in retrospect, we could have messaged better, particularly to the people who lived outside of the fire area, but right below it. Because if you stepped outside your door, and the chief is going to explain about direction and where it was going, and it wasn't going in that direction, and we knew that. But if I stepped outside my door and looked up at that wall of fire, I would not have known that it wasn't coming my way. So we've taken some steps, both in discussions with the county about possibly taking on the burden of doing our own alerting. That those discussions are going to be, right now it's the county's responsibility. Fire tells us what they need. We determine where the alerting and messaging is going to go, and then we contact County Office of Emergency Management, and they actually put out the alerts. We may look at doing that in a slightly different fashion. The other thing that happened, just so you know, and you both at the budget hearing before this commission, and then last week, or 2 weeks ago, no, it was last week, in front of the city council, I talked about the critical importance of dispatch and dispatchers. The night that fire broke out, we had 2 officers and 2 dispatchers working in the communication center. They were absolutely overwhelmed by 911 calls. There is a protocol that allows us to roll, at least I'm told that there's a protocol that allows us to roll calls to the county to ask them to handle our 911 calls. But apparently that process hasn't been used in a number of years. And so I have to find out if it's still current and whether it's practical. I know from my own personal experience working at the sheriff's office that they're as short-staffed in their communication center as we are. So that's more to follow on that. And then the city had discussions today. Chief Males and I were both part of that about from any time that we're having a discussion about evacuating people, that we'll be moving in the direction of always having a partial activation of the EOC, which will help take some of the burden off of the communication. So that's the end of my report about the Loma fire. I'll entertain any questions that the commission might have. Or I don't know if you want to wait till the fire chief presents or.
So, Chief, you drew the box. How long and how much of our force was actually dedicated to that evacuation or steering people out of that area?
Probably 90% of the people that were on duty. We were very fortunate that in the sense that the fire occurred right at shift change. And so we had the offgoing and ongoing patrol shifts that were both there. We had 19 patrol officers, not counting some detectives and people who came in. 16 of them were assigned immediately to the fire. 3 of them were left to handle calls for the entire rest of the city. And as I mentioned, we ultimately had 34 sworn personnel plus 25 sheriff's deputies that were available to us.
Right. Wow.
But any other questions?
I think that your dispatchers do a fabulous job. Just 100%.
Thank you. Sorry, yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I don't have a question. Excuse me for interrupting you. I just want to say thank you on behalf of our community. I live in the area and I received the knock at the door. So I know how important it is and I know the amount of work that went into it. And I know that all of the people that I've spoken with genuinely appreciate every effort that was made, because it could have been a lot different. And I believe had the winds not subsided when they did, it would have been a lot different.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll make sure and relay that. And I'm very sincere when I say that your comments are greatly appreciated.
Chief Malekian, just curious, I think when we think of fires, we assume that, of course, fire department will respond. When the police department responds, what duties do you perform other than knocking on the doors?
We're responsible for all the evacuation that's going to take place, and that includes not only identifying the area to be evacuated, but directing where people should evacuate. That takes some time to stand up because it involves coordination between County Office of Emergency Management and usually the Red Cross. The Red Cross has recently developed what are called, they used to be that they would either tell people where the tents were going to be or what motels or hotels were going to be available, and they would direct people there. They've gone to a slightly different system now. Around the county, there are 17 pre-designated sites, and I'm waiting to get a list of those. Where in the case of this event, it was the City College parking lot, and the idea is that people are directed to go to this I don't want to say pre-evacuation, but this designated point, where then Red Cross will liaison with them and tell them where they can go and what they need. So we're responsible for that evacuation. We're responsible for the alerting and the messaging. And we're responsible for road closures and traffic control. That was a huge problem. And again, a couple of these things were a function of how quickly the fire took off. The almost other end of the spectrum on this is the Thomas Fire, which if you remember, sort of marched in a very orderly fashion. You could almost predict like 24 hours in advance, okay, where is it going to be next? This exploded very quickly, and we had the fire department, and Chief Mills will talk more about it, had a great deal of difficulty moving their apparatus around the people who had just pulled over, stopped, and were out taking pictures, of the fire. We did get the roads closed, but we didn't get them closed in the first hour, just because of how rapidly events were unfolding. But that's essentially the law enforcement mission.
Great, well, thank you. I wanted to say this during the fire update or report, but I just commend the fire department, the police department, all the other supportive services for their quick response and their collaborative effort, because this could have been a lot worse. Even the evacuation process could have been much more chaotic. And the teams at Santa Barbara really showed how organized and collaborative we are during emergencies. So thank you to both departments for that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And I would just add, I think that the way the crowds were handled, because it was obvious that people were concerned of whether they had family in the area or just generally concerned. And there seemed to be an inordinate amount of traffic here on Miramonte when the fire vehicles were trying to get through and different things. So I think possibly a lot of your resources were trying to move the people out of the way so that you could get there. And I think the way that was handled was good, because people are concerned, and rightfully so. So thank you generally just for all of the work.
Well, thank you both for your comments.
Hey, Chief, I have a question. There was an arrest made. Was it in direct connection with that incident, or was it?
It was. It was.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any more questions about the fire. I'll just talk, if there aren't, I'll talk briefly about some staffing challenge, a staffing philosophy challenge that I talked about Thursday. I just want the commission to be aware of it. because we may want to come back and talk in a little bit more detail about what this means. But as I explained to the council on Thursday, and I think I mentioned it at the commission meeting last month, we're down in looking at our strength. There's the number of positions that are authorized by the council. There are the number of positions that are actually filled. And then there's what's called functional strength, which is the number of people that are actually at work and not on workers' compensation or family leave or military leave or off on training or something. And so our functional strength, we're down 34 positions underneath our authorized sworn position. That's 24%. We're authorized 142 sworn personnel. That's everybody from the chief to the newest recruit in the academy. We currently have filled 123 of those positions, but functionally we only have 108. We have 6 officers that are assigned full-time to dispatch because of a shortage of dispatchers. We have 3 people in the academy. We have 7 people on injured on duty or other leave status. This is and our professional staff, and just a sort of a point of semantic order. You'll sometimes hear that people who aren't sworn referred to as civilians or non-sworn, and I've never liked those terms. I prefer the term professional staff. The work that they do is critical, and we really couldn't function without them. And we're authorized 67 professional staff. We have currently 58, but functionally we only have 54. So that's a big hit as well. And then lastly, for a number of years, we've been augmented on an average of 15,000 hours per year by hourly employees, by people who come in and work for, at the front desk counter or, doing various projects around the city for the department. Well, those positions were eliminated as part of the COVID budget reduction. So that's 15,000 hours, or the equivalent of 16 half-time personnel that we don't have anymore. I'm telling you all this not because to cry the blue or to say that we should have more people, because I recognize the position that the city's in terms of its budget. But there are really two sort of modes of operation of law enforcement, and one is reactive. People call 911. They state that they have a problem, and we send however many people we need to send to deal with that problem. And then there's the proactive work. There's our bike team and our homeless outreach team and the nightlife team and the foot beats on State Street and the waterfront and other places like that. Those are what I call proactive. If they're done right, they solve a problem before it's actually a crisis. That's the methodology. And for the most part, the Santa Barbara Police Department and most other departments have been able to sort of have those two functions coexist. But we're in a place now where we're going to have to emphasize one over the other. And that's part of internal discussions. And my hope is that by the next commission meeting, I'll be in a position to come and talk to you about specific recommendations we're going to make about how to address this issue. And that, I don't know if there's any questions about that, but that just concludes this report.
Chief, we got a question on the 6 officers in dispatch.
You know what?
Commissioner Allman, by chance, do you have your phone on at the same time? Are you doing phone?
You know what helps in this situation, if I may, is if everyone turns off their mic while Commissioner Altman speaks. That might fix the problem.
How's that?
Sorry, Commissioner, try again if you would.
I wonder if you mute your computer, not your mic, but mute your computer so that it's not taking in what you're saying in the mic.
How's that? Better?
Better.
Yeah.
Yes.
The question was, do you have 6 full-time officers in dispatch and they're not on patrol?
That's correct. Oh, sorry. That's correct.
Wow. Thank you.
I have a couple questions, Chief Malikian. First, I wonder, one of the things that Chief Luno used to do, which was very helpful and informative, is she would provide a crime stats report probably once a quarter, and it just gave a breakdown of the type of contact, police contact took place during that period, and compared it to the year before, or maybe even a few years before. Just to give the public, an update on the activities of the department. And if you're interested, I can send you one of Chief Luno's reports from, I think the last one I have is March of 2000. But it was very helpful and informative, and it really just painted a clear picture of what the department is doing. And it's actually it shows that you're doing a lot. So I think that would be really helpful for the public. And then also, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the homeless conversations that we're having, and how that is impacting the police department, and what the commission can do to support the department in your efforts.
Thank you. Tuesday night at 6 o'clock was really sent what to do with the homeless encampments throughout the city, and how could we address this issue. And the driving force, of course, is the Boise decision that says really you can't move people unless you can't make people move unless you are offering them a place to move to. And the second part of that was the CDC guidelines that for over a year, because of COVID, have really suggested leaving homeless encampments alone because of the risk of spreading disease if you move people out of there. Those guidelines are probably on the verge of lifting. The city council voted to consider or to declare a state of emergencies in certain fire-prone areas. And at some point, we will be working with environmental services and other city departments as the outreach starts, and I suspect it will be done very systematically. The first big decision is where can people move to, and there was about 6 different locations that were discussed on Tuesday night. No decision has been made. Staff is supposed to come back with a recommendation at the council meeting on June 8th. The police department will certainly be involved in that, but my desire is that we will be in a supporting role behind the community-based organizations like SBACT and CityNet, as well as City Environmental Services, and not be on the sort of the forward edge of that effort. I think that some of the challenges are going to be the people who are, I think the technical term is service resistant, who don't really want to move. And they, at some point, especially when those that are camped in these heavy brush areas, are going to have to move. There's going to be some jurisdictional issues about the Caltrans property and Union Pacific property. And it gets very complicated. In terms of what the commission can do, I think I think just as we engage with this dialogue, or as you hear things in the community, what I don't want, particularly in this environment, and I think I've been here long enough, you know what my philosophy is about how we deal with people and this concept of felt presence versus heavy, heavy kind of in your face enforcement, unless it's an absolute last resort. I hope that if you're hearing other things, or you're hearing community concerns, or there are things I should be aware of, I hope you'll bring it to my attention, whether it's, in the context of this meeting or outside of that. Because this is, and every one of you I know is aware of this. This is a potentially very volatile issue. It's not going to be, you could tell from the comments that it's not universally seen as a great idea. And I want it to be clear that this is a city effort, not a police department effort. And if I could tell you one little aside about that meeting on Tuesday night, there was a lot of concern about the alerting, and at the time the meeting started, and there were some people who had said, oh no, the police department didn't evacuate anybody. At the time the meeting started, there were 142 people waiting to speak. We showed a 75, we have several officers who have body cameras as part of the trial, because we're going to roll body cameras out later this year. We played a 75-second video clip from one of the officers' videos evacuating people out of a burning building, and over 100 people dropped off the speaker list. Anyway, I don't know if I answered your question, and I'm sorry for the aside. I just remembered that.
Oh, it was a powerful aside. I'm realizing that the police department is in this sort of middle space between community dialogue and demands for reallocating services to service providers away from police, but then at the same time, residents and businesses are also demanding that police respond to homeless issues. So it's a tricky place to be, and just kind of wondering what the department would like to see.
As I said the other day, I understand the dialogue that's going on right now, and I understand the societal debate. I've been in this business almost 50 years, so it's, I'm not naive about the problems or about what's going on. I just want us to make a distinction between discussions about restructuring criminal justice or changing the role of the police or changing priorities, that's an appropriate and constructive conversation to have. It's this shaming and denigration of individual men and women that serve in the profession that I really can't abide. And it's one of the reasons that I wanted to come back and take this assignment, because these really are some incredible people, not just here, but everywhere. And they've really taken a beating over the last year. And this commission, quite frankly, in the short time I've been here, has been just fabulous about making it clear that even as you're having a discussion about should the police be doing something different, should we handle these things in a different way, that's not the same as saying that the men and women who do the work are bad people.
Thank you for that. I am feeling appreciative that we have someone with your experience in progressive policing and reform in policing as our interim. So thank you for being here and serving our community.
It's my privilege, and I'm not just saying that to be glib. It really is. So. That's all I have.
Looking forward to
other than I apologize. Yeah. I have to go to an event at Eastside Park, so I'll probably have to drop off about 5:30 or 5:40.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and I agree with the Vice Chair's endorsement of your philosophy, but I look forward to a little bit more discussion on your distinction between the reactive and the proactive and balancing that out, that how you're going to engineer that going forward, given the budget context. So I think that's really, how you're going to be earning a large portion of your paycheck, right? Figuring that one out. So
Well,
looking forward to
to
that.
put it in its simplest terms, it's going to come down to what do we stop doing or at least delay? What do we prioritize? And everybody always thinks that's a good idea until we actually tell them what it is that we're going to slow down. And then it's a different. I remember a few years ago, the police chief in San Diego realized that he had a big problem with garage burglaries, and 80% of the reported crimes, the people had left their garage door open. So he made the decision that he was not going to send patrol cars to take garage burglary reports. You could do it online or at that time over the phone. And that lasted about 72 hours till the public outcry was so intense that they went back to doing it. So I am very mindful about that.
Great anecdote. I love it. All right. Any other comments? I love hearing all this commentary from the commissioners too. It just shows sort of a deepening level of cohesion, especially in a tumultuous previous 12 months or even longer, I guess. And as it continues forward, especially with not only our vice chair, but Commissioner Travis Teague. So, and Carol, is there someone from the public that wants to comment?
Yes, Mr. Voigt has tried to reconnect, and if not, if we can't get his audio, he did submit a question. So, Mr. Voigt, I'm going to try to unmute you again. Are you there? Okay. He said he was having trouble with his audio. So I'll read his question that he submitted, if that's okay.
Sure.
He said, sorry, for some reason our audio wouldn't connect. We want to make sure the tow rates are on the agenda for the next meeting in June, since this was already brought up with the police department, and that's why it's in front of you. I would urge a real meeting, perhaps outdoors in the Korea Street lot at the fire department, to make sure everyone is heard and not skipped over. Thank you, Grade Voigt, Smitty's Towing. That's the end of his message.
Okay, great. And thank you, Mr. Voigt. And I know exactly what he's referring to, because the last time that we weighted or processed these particular rates, we had a pretty good audience of operators. So I recognize that they have a lot of input, and we certainly, we would not be making any decision without their input, just to remind the public. And hopefully Officer Kamen will be around too, at some future point to answer any, tactical questions or ground questions. I know he's got pretty good relationships with some of the operators.
We can certainly make that happen if that's the commission's wish.
Great. Are there more questions on tow operator rates and our responsibility from the commissioners? Okay. Any other hands raised, Carol?
No other hands raised.
Okay. All right. We have no subcommittees, so this always appears on our agenda, but we don't have any subcommittees. So we're going to move right through that item, number 9, and move on to item number 10, which is the fire department update.
Good afternoon, Chair Stedman, Commissioners Rodriguez, Allman, and Travis Teague. Chris Bales, your fire chief. Good afternoon from Fire Station 1. I did have the opportunity to talk to Commissioner Allman a couple of times in the last few days. We've had a very busy few weeks at the fire department. I thought I'd start with an overview of the fires and get into a little bit of detail on the Loma fire, because that's everyone's interest. And then I'll talk a little bit more about what's going on with the fire department, where we're headed this summer. And if we have a chance, we'll talk about the annual report that I submitted to you. So I'll begin with the fact that fire season is upon us. We've had another drought year. The Los Angeles basin received less than 5 inches of rain. We obviously didn't get a whole lot of rain in our area either. And so we are well entering into the fire season toward the end of May. We expect it to be a significant fire season, extending, basically the whole West Coast. Just so you know, we are always primarily protective of the city of Santa Barbara. Our primary mission is to be firefighters for the city of Santa Barbara. However, we are also part of the vast and expansive mutual aid system that was really born in California many, many years ago. And it has since then been perfected and has become the envy of the entire world. Our firefighters on a regular basis respond well outside our city jurisdictions, including really to all of the West Coast. People have asked me, where have you gone? And I've personally gone from Orange County to the Cascade Mountains in my 28 years. I actually, 3 years ago, ended up near Yakima, Washington on a wildland fire. So we do go all over. But our primary mission is the city of Santa Barbara. So whenever we send firefighters out of our jurisdiction, we immediately backfill them. And we backfill them so that we have the staffing. We don't send out any more personnel than we can safely backfill, and we obviously need to staff our engines. So we call it a drawdown number. We send as many as 18 people out at a time. Now that may not sound like a lot, but remember our shift strength is only 28. So that really is the better of 1/2 of a shift. So that's a lot of personnel. Now, that doesn't mean, that's not a hard number. If we had 18 people out of town and we had a fire, like the Whittier fire a few years ago, yes, we would respond to that still. But on a general basis, we adhere to about 18 personnel out at a time. So we're entering into wildland season, and we just saw our first wildland fire right here in the city of Santa Barbara. So I'll paint a little bit of a picture for you. First of all, the message I really want to relay, and Chief Malekian talked about the role of the police department. It truly takes a village to put out a fire. And, the firefighters on the side of the hill on television that everyone saw, well, there's dispatchers, there's support personnel, there's police officers, and then something that maybe we didn't think about, the National Weather Service. We are really fortunate in this area that we have an incredibly engaged National Weather Service. National Weather Service Los Angeles is based out of Oxnard. We have some of the best fire weather forecasters in the world. And when fire season is upon us, we will often have a daily weather briefing and even as much as a webinar. So that day, we received a weather briefing from the National Weather Service. They do a conference call with all of the area fire departments. This goes from San Luis down to Los Angeles, and they were expecting some winds. And we saw the winds materialize. A lot of people know about the sundowner winds, but for those that don't, the sundowner winds are really kind of unique to our area. They affect the Santa Barbara front country. They're not Santa Ana winds. Some people will say, well, they're kind of like Santa Ana winds. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, Santa Ana winds form from a high pressure system over the Great Basin and a low pressure system off the Pacific. But the sundowner winds form from either a high pressure over Bakersfield and a low pressure off Santa Barbara, or high pressure over Santa Maria and low pressure over Santa Barbara. So if you know anything about weather, the winds are going to travel from high to low pressure. And that's what we've seen. We've seen sundowner winds, and the name's a bit of a misnomer, but they typically peak in the evening time and die off by the morning. But we saw them in the Sherpa fire. I was up on Refugio Road when I watched that smoke column anvil over and head down. And that's always a really scary thing to see. We saw it with the holiday fire. Okay, I was on duty that night. I didn't respond to the holiday fire, but at the corner of Carrillo and Chapala Street at 2 a.m., when I was out on a call, it was 102 degrees. We saw it with the Thomas fire. So our firefighters are really engaged with sundowner type winds. So those winds materialized. And what I mean by that is they showed up in Santa Barbara. So that evening we had a full duty strength. We had all of our fire stations staffed. We had Battalion Chief Jim McCoy on duty. He is a 31-year veteran. He started with CAL FIRE. He is an incredibly competent wildland fire incident commander. All of our battalion chiefs are incredibly competent with wildland fire. It's what we do, as you can see, as you can tell. We had 5 fires that evening. Crews were on scene of a fire on Walnut Avenue when the Loma fire broke out. Battalion Chief McCoy was first on scene. He arrived onto Loma Alta, and upon his arrival, he had fire that was already about halfway up the hillside with what we call a rapid rate of spread. It was being pushed by winds that they're estimating at about 50 miles per hour. And most importantly, the winds were in alignment with the mountainside or the hillside. There's 3 huge factors that influence wildland fire. That is weather, fuel, and topography. Weather, we had the weather, winds, dry temperatures. Fuel, we had a continuous fuel bed on the side of that hillside. And topography, where the mountain sat, the aspect of the mountain and the way the wind hit, it aligned. And when it aligns, it allows for rapid rate of spread. So upon his arrival shortly after dispatch, the fire was about halfway up the hillside. He made an immediate request for additional engine companies, and we have some strategy that we employ. One of the most important strategies is always life safety. So we look at 3 things: life safety, property conservation, and environmental protection. Life safety is always, always, always at the top. So he began to deploy resources on the fire from below, but immediately deployed resources to Miramonte. Engine 76 from our Cliff Drive station was the first engine to arrive up on Miramonte and did a quick triage of the buildings and began to take a stand. By the end of the evening, we had 11 fire engines up on that section of Miramonte and Via del Cielo. By the end of the night, we had 22 fire engines on scene with a total of 162 personnel. Where did they come from? Okay, they came from our partner agencies. The mutual aid system is you call, we come. We don't worry about money. We don't worry about who's going to sign the paycheck. You call, we come, especially with an immediate need threat like we had. So we were able to request numerous engine companies from Santa Barbara County Fire, from Montecito Fire, from Carpinteria Fire, and from Ventura County Fire. So again, by the end of the evening, 22 engines on scene. My initial comment of it takes a village, and that's what I'm talking about. We don't have the infrastructure, the fire department standing army in place to put out a wildland fire like that on our own. We reach out to our partners. We reach out to our law enforcement partners. We reach out to numerous agencies and departments for help. So the fire literally exploded almost immediately. Again, Chief McCoy was on scene within just a couple of minutes. And what's interesting is anyone that's been on one of these types of fires, and Commissioner Allman, I know you've been on a few of them on TV Hill, we know what they're going to do. They are going to run to the top, okay? The flame links that were associated with that fire, I wasn't there at that time, but it's important to note that if the fire flame lengths are higher than 4 to 8 feet, firefighters can't get close enough to put water on that fire because it's too hot. So we have to resort to other things. We have to resort to letting the fire burn to a place where we can catch it. We resort to aircraft, et cetera. And we try to get out ahead of it, especially with structures, and do what's called structure defense. And that's what we did. And at the end of the night, we had 2 structures damaged. We had a fence at KEYT that was damaged, and we had nothing else. I would call this a tremendous win for the firefighters. In my opinion, this had the makings of an Oakland Hills fire, where the fire starts in the vegetation and then becomes a sustained structure to structure to structure to structure fire. And that's what we were able to avoid. If you at some point have the opportunity to get up to Miramonte, you will see clearly that the fire lapped over the top of the ridge. And as Commissioner Travis Teague said, the wind changed, but also the fire was then on the lee side of the mountain. It wasn't on the windward side of the mountain, it was on the lee side of the mountain. And those 11 engine companies were then able to pick up the fire all around the structures on Miramonte and Via del Cielo. So overall, I think the incident went really, really well. We've had some questions about evacuations, and Chief Malecki, I think, addressed those really well. Sometimes you got to go old school, and old school was knocking on the doors. It was getting up there and getting the people out of the way. Our firefighters knock on the doors. People don't really knock on people's doors at 10 o'clock at night. So there was some hesitation, and here's a firefighter standing at the door. We need to get you out of this house. It was very effective. So we had no injuries. The fire was largely out by midnight, and we began repopulating the people back into Miramonte shortly after midnight. We've had questions about the lower west side of Santa Barbara. And I'll tell you that fire moves 4 times uphill faster than downhill without wind. So that fire was being pushed uphill by a 50-mile-per-hour wind. That fire was going uphill. It was not going downhill. The fire was not going downhill against a 50-mile-per-hour wind. However, there was obviously a concern for the residents in the lower west side. So we had 3 engine companies in the lower west side of Santa Barbara that were actually driving through the neighborhood, talking to people, looking for any ember casts, anything like that. And we had several engines that were actually out beyond Miramonte on the other side. Again, where was the fire going to go? Okay, if the winds continued, the fire was going to Ledbetter Beach. And so it was a tremendous stop in my mind. And again, we could not have done that without all of our partners. Another question I had was, why didn't we call a helicopter? Well, the helicopters are staffed typically during the day because that's when they're most effective and safest. So our county fire helicopter was available. It was going to have a 1-hour ETA. They're in San Ynez, so it was going to take a while to get the aircraft out of the hangar, spooled up, et cetera. And so our incident commanders, for several reasons, said, let's hold off on the helicopter. Number 1, flying a helicopter at night is dangerous. Number 2, they figured the fire was going to go out by the time the helicopter arrived. And that is in fact basically what happened. But third, and really most important, is over about 30-mile-an-hour winds, it's incredibly dangerous to fly a helicopter, and the water drops become ineffective. The water comes out of the bottom of the helicopter and is just sprayed off. It doesn't even hit the ground with a wind like that. So all of those things were in the incident commander's mind. And what they elected to do was an excellent strategy, and that was continue to let the fire burn to the top, protect the buildings, put the fire out around the buildings, and we were really fortunate to see a decrease in the winds. So Chief Malecki mentioned the box, and that is exactly what we call it. When we arrive on the scene of a vegetation fire, we build a box. And the box consists of, where can we catch this thing? The box is not out in the middle of nowhere. The box may be a riverbed. The box may be a road. The box may be a ridge. In this case, the box was really Loma Alta to Isleta to Miramonte, and then kind of an imaginary line that went up really kind of the end of Canna Perdido and went up toward the summit of Miramonte. Remember, that was a northwest wind. So if you really look at where the fire was, it was going up the hill and it was going to be pushed to the left. That It's going to follow topography. It's going to follow the wind. And that's exactly what it did. That was if you were to ask me the day before, where's this fire going to go with this wind? I would have said it's going to start right here. It's going to go right there. And that's exactly the decisions and the strategy that they employed. So overall, I would say it was an excellent success. At the same time the firefight was going on, we had multiple fire investigators that were out, and one of our fire investigators found the suspect. And as Chief Malekian spoke of, the suspect was then arrested and is currently in jail being held on $2 million bail. So a lot of people thought that this started in a homeless encampment. It did not. It involved a homeless individual, but it was not in an encampment. But also, we are really aware that there have been homeless encampments in that area, and we were really happy to see that on an investigation, there was no one up there. So there was no life lost on that fire, which could have absolutely been the case. And also, in good part, due to our efforts with law enforcement and fire to get people out of that area. That Loma Alta hillside is not a good area for people to be homeless. So that's kind of an overview. You know, and people go, well, why were you guys there for so long? You know, they saw firefighters on the hillside. A fire is not out until it is cold and out. And depending on the terrain, depending on forecasted winds, we go in from the edges of the fire. We may go in 50 feet, we may go in 100 feet, we may go in 200 feet. And we completely go through that fire, basically build a box around the fire and make sure that it's cold, cold, cold on all four sides of the fire. This fire, we made cold all the way in. The entire fire was cold. And at that point, that is when we called the fire completely contained on the afternoon of the 24th. So that's just an overview. I'll absolutely entertain any questions. I apologize. As you might know, I'm a little bit long-winded, but hopefully you got a pretty good overview of the fire itself.
Hey, Chief, this might be premature. I know you have a pretty comprehensive report loaded up, but what impact do the policies of the fire marshal have, you know, as we enter into this season? Because, you know, just walking around the neighborhood here in the Mesa, you know, sometimes people leave their garages open, and do they work on hoarding? And, you know, that's a fuel that's more suburban, but what's being done on the prevention side, you know, to eliminate fuel that just exists in our neighborhoods?
So that's a really complex question. Going back to the power of the fire marshal, the power of the fire marshal is to enforce fire code, uniform building code, to make sure that the community is fire safe. However, we also have other city departments that need to weigh in, including the city attorney's office, as far as what can be done in individual areas, what can be done on private property, what can be done on public property, what can be done on state property, et cetera. So it's really complex. And that's what a fire marshal does. Going in and abating someone's private property in what's not a high fire hazard area is problematic. So to your question about hoarding, yes, we do actually, one of our fire inspectors is a specialist in hoarding, but that is a really long and drawn out legal process also. Individuals' personal property is you can't just take that, you can't take it off their property, you can't even take it away from a homeless person. So I'm not trying to dodge around the question, but that is a question we could talk about for hours, really. Okay. But I will say this, fire prevention is absolutely key in our community. And we are fortunate to have a fire prevention team that is incredibly engaged in our community. We're not just reactionary. Okay, our fire prevention inspectors are out on the streets and looking for stuff and and, finding homeless camps that may be problematic. It gets a little dicey going into these situations beforehand, but, we're out in the community and we're trying to limit issues that may or may not come up.
Thanks a lot for even trying to tackle that one.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Chief Males, I have a couple questions. One, whenever you decide to retire, I think you can go into fireside storytelling, because when you present your reports, I am like right there and I see what you're talking about. So I appreciate the details. I'm curious about, and again, as I said with Chief Melekian, thank you for your quick action, your organization, your coordination. 162 personnel came together so quickly, and the mutual aid system that you have together is it's impressive. So thank you for that. I'm curious about the risk of flood or debris flow or landslide in that area. And I imagine that is a concern, probably not for the next couple months, but if and when we do get rain, how much of a threat is that?
Commissioner Rodriguez, thank you. It's a great question. We probably saw the worst example of that during the Thomas Fire and the Montecito debris flow. That was 3 weeks between fire and flood. And since then, the state on a whole has looked at not only the firefight, but as soon as the fire's out, then they begin to look at, fixing the soil and bringing in, chaparral and trying to rejuvenate the area. But then obviously comes the issue of a possible flood. Being May, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we've got a few months that before we end up with a significant rainstorm. However, I will tell you that literally hours after that fire started, the city started focusing on what to do to remediate that hillside. And just this morning, there was a team of city officials from Public Works, from the fire department, from streets, a geologist, engineers, looking at that hillside. So they have wasted no time at all. And I don't know what they're going to end up doing. There are a bunch of different possibilities. I'll just give you an example of one. They could hydro seed. They could bring in, seeds that are blown onto the hillside, and they immediately begin to germinate and provide a protective layer. And there's a bunch of other things they can do. But I think probably to answer your question most succinctly is it's already happening. And I think the public can rest assured that we are already thinking about the rainy season. And like I said this morning, efforts are already underway.
Great, thank you. That's great to hear. And then the same question that I asked Chief Melekian about the homeless issues. In March, you had reported that I believe it was 15.4% of calls are EMS calls related to homeless individuals. And then Fire Marshal Joe noted something like 20-something calls for encampment fires were done this month, where normally in a typical year it'd be 1 to 2. So obviously the fire department and the police department are highly impacted by the large number of homeless individuals that we're seeing. And with the proposed declaration of state of emergency by our city council, I'm wondering what would you need? What would you like to see? What would your department like to see? And what can the Fire and Police Commission do to support that?
Thank you, Commissioner Rodriguez. That's a great question. Again, this is probably a really complex question to answer, but I will say a couple of things. One thing we have done is we were tasked, as you know, we're undergoing some significant fiscal challenges right now. And I was tasked with finding about $1.5 million in budget savings for my department for the next fiscal year. We've done that rather creatively. I've mentioned that we've done that by lease purchase of fire apparatus, by decreasing the amount of money that's going into apparatus replacement. But one of the things we did was we are freezing a fire prevention inspector position. Our fire marshal is retiring, and we are going to bump everyone up and not fill below. And this is a really important position for our department. This is a safety inspector that can handle fire investigations, can handle investigations of basically anything, and go out and interact with homeless. One of the things that I am tasking my fire prevention division with next year is some more proactive work. Now, we can't go out there and hand a homeless camp a fire extinguisher and say, teach you how to use it. But what we can do is go out and look at the different hazardous areas, make some recommendations, attempt to get people to move to a different location, work with our partners at Caltrans, at the Union Pacific, et cetera, to try to limit the amount of growth that's able to spread. All of that takes time. On the short term, it would be great if we could get that fire prevention inspector position back. The other thing I've asked for is, as you know, we implemented a community wildfire protection plan. And so I've asked for some funding to handle some vegetation management and fuels reduction. And I've actually asked for a defensible space employee that can interact with the different crews and work on vegetation management. The first place we would concentrate on is above Highway 192. There's a belt, a fire belt that we would like to create, basically an area of a fire break, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But the city, we need to be fiscally responsive, and we are facing a budget deficit. As you know, our city is incredibly reliant on tourism and sales tax. Both of those took a huge hit. I was just before the meeting, I was on a budget call. And so I don't want to be frivolous with the city's money and say, hey, we've got to have this, 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 and this, because we really are in tight budget times right now. But again, if I was to prioritize, I'd like to get that position back. And I would really like to start a bit of a proactive plan to be able to get out there and take a look at what we're dealing with in the high fire hazard areas, especially along the transportation corridor. While not designated as a high fire hazard area, it is because we've seen so many fires there. So it's a hazard area due to the number of fires. So that would be what I would ask for. I think that we need to come up with obviously some type of a long-term solution. I don't know if the fire department can do, that's obviously not our charge, but we definitely, as Chief Alekian says, we need to be part of the solution. Maybe not out in front, but we need to be part of the solution. So hopefully that answers your question.
That does thoroughly. And I'm wondering, Chair Stedman, is this something that we as a commission can recommend for the city, especially during budget conversations? If the city is going to declare a state of emergency for fire-prone areas, and yet we're reducing or not hiring for a fire prevention specialist, can we make that recommendation that that position is filled?
Yes, we can. I mean, in our advisory capacity. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, John, but I mean, that's the kind of input that we want to definitely get in front of City Council.
Yes, hold on one second. I apologize. Yes, you are. That's exactly within your purview to make such recommendations. That's one of the main powers and duties of this commission to do so. The only thing I would recommend is maybe bringing that specific issue up more, going a little more detail to agendize it, and then have a formal action to write a letter. You can include in the agenda which commissioner you want to delegate, or commissioners to write the letter and do that. So absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Vice Chair.
So then would it be appropriate for, I'm going to volunteer you, Chief, Commissioner Allman, to maybe work with Chief Males and come up with the wording that we can discuss in the next meeting. However, will they still be in budget conversations in the June meeting? Will we be too late, I'm wondering?
That's a question for Chief Mails, but
Yeah, Commissioner Rodriguez, I believe that, I know you're the fourth Thursday of the month, and I believe that's right after they settle the budget. So we may be a little bit late on that.
I think they're reviewing the budget or finalizing it on June 9th.
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Didn't have my
And
calendar.
then I think they do quarterly budget reviews. And if that's the case, then maybe we can squeeze in before the first quarter review to recommend. So I heard the fire prevention position, and then the wildlife, developing a proactive plan, just kind of secure that perimeter area. So
Correct.
I'll leave that at the youth specialist to figure that out.
Commissioner Allman, I can work with you. I've got a document already. But I really want to make sure, I think there's a message that, you know, I don't want to ask for the world, because we really are in tough budget times. And it's really about the entire city. And especially when dealing with the homeless, it's a multi-department effort. So, you know, perhaps council may realize that there's money that could be better spent in another department to help the city as a whole. So, but I will absolutely work with Commissioner Allman. I can send him some material and information.
great, be glad to be part of that.
So I have just a couple of more things. And I realize my time is, I do have an annual report that I was hoping that came to you, that I was hoping to share with you, that we could go over very, very quickly. But one thing I wanted to share with you before is, excuse me, is our COVID situation at the fire department. As you may or may not know, I know I've spoken with you about it before, we've really changed the internal operations of our fire department from top to bottom due to the COVID response or COVID pandemic. Everything from our responses, how we dress to go to a medical call, to what our station life is like, to what our drills are like. And most importantly, we've largely been hunkered down in the stations and have not been out in the community doing public education, doing fire prevention, doing the activities that our firefighters normally do in between calls. However, with the state opening up on June 15th, our firefighters will begin assimilating back into the community. We will likely begin some low risk public education. But most importantly, we're going to be beginning our fire inspection program again. And we will be likely concentrating on apartment complexes, multi-residential units, looking at life safety hazards, rather than focusing on small businesses. We're going to first deal with the apartments that we haven't been in over a year. So, but people have asked, you know, what about the firefighters? You know, what are they, you know, are they going to have to continue to wear masks? Or are they really going to be able to go out into the public? And that really remains to be seen. And so one thing, the city is really working on a comprehensive plan for all the city employees coming back to work and how to keep our workers safe. But at the fire department, we really are looking at 4 key agencies that help guide our decisions. One, of course, is the Centers for Disease Control, CDC. We also look at the California Department of Public Health. We also look at the health officer orders of Santa Barbara County. All 3 of those look at citizens, everyone. However, we have a 4th that we have to look at, and that's Cal OSHA. And so Cal OSHA was supposed to make a decision on May 20th about how the workplace was going to proceed, and they actually delayed that decision. So we're kind of in a state of flux right now. Our firefighters are still wearing masks in the fire stations. They're still wearing masks on the fire engines. And so we're kind of waiting to see what the Cal OSHA guidelines are for the workplace. So the city is kind of in flux right now also. But we're hoping after June 15th that we are able to get back out in the community and do what our firefighters love to do, and that is community engagement. So with that, I'll move on to the annual report. We can do this very quickly. I know that the annual report was given to you. I'm hoping right now that I can, excuse me for just a sec, share my screen. Do you guys have this? Are you able to see the annual report right now? No?
Hold on, I gotta put you as in control, Chief.
Okay.
And Chief, no offense, I was looking forward to the annual report, but I do have to drop off.
No offense taken, Chief.
Thank you, commissioners. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chief.
Okay, just lost the report on my end. If you just give me 1 second here, I'll bring it back up. 1 second, I apologize. I believe I hit the wrong screen. Okay, is that it? Are you seeing a screen now? Okay, great. All right. So I just wanted to share our annual report with you. This is from a company called FireStats. They take our all of our data that comes out of the computer-aided dispatch, CAD, all of the raw times that come out of dispatch, all of the call types, all of the apparatus, and they put it into a report for us. I've shared both monthly and quarterly reports with you, and so I thought I'd just spend a couple of minutes and share our annual report with you. This is for 2020. So we'll scroll down here and I'll go past the table of contents and I'll get to the good stuff. Here we go with table number 1. Table number 1 shows, and some of these tables are repetitive, but I draw your attention to 2019 and 2020. If you look in 2019, our department ran 10,621 calls. And you can kind of see some of the major breakdowns. We had about 1,200 fires, and that's fires of all type. But you can see that the vast majority of our calls were medical related. Moving over to 2020, wow, our call volume dropped. What happened there? Why did our call volume drop? I'm going to show you that during the months of April, May, and June of 2020, we had a significant drop off in calls for service. There were days where I was working that the radio didn't make any noise for hours, and it was really apparent that the community was indeed shut down. The stay-at-home order, the people beginning to work from home, nationwide, there was a 40% decrease in traffic accidents. I believe I shared that with you. So we saw almost a 400 call decrease for 2020 compared to 2019. And in one of the tables that I'll show you, you'll clearly see why. Our call volume is now back to normal. We are now at a normal 30 to 40 calls a day. And so we're largely returning to normal activity, our post-COVID time. Unique incidents. This is really a different look at that table graph that you saw, but you'll see, I'll draw your attention to, we are running about 71.5% medical calls, about 11% fires. And again, that can be everything from a vehicle fire to a structured fire to a vegetation fire. We have public assist type calls, hazardous condition calls. Example of that would be a power line down, a tree down into a building, smell of gas, smell of smoke, something like that. And assist calls, by the way, is often elder assists. We call them lift assist. We go out and help people that have fallen but are not injured. As an aside, our medical dispatchers do an outstanding job. When you call 911, they assess you over the phone to make sure that you don't have any injuries. If you have injuries, they send it out as a medical emergency. If you don't have injuries, a single fire engine is dispatched and they do a medical assessment and help the person back into bed or their chair or what have you. So very typical municipal type fire department calls. Here is where you'll see a significant drop off in calls. This is the graph that I wanted to bring your attention to. Look at April. Look at April even compared to the previous April. You'll see that we had a significant drop off of a couple of hundred calls. We started to tick back up, and then you'll see last August, we were kind of back to normal. Then if you look at November again, you kind of see a drop off in November of 2020 when we started to get into another surge of COVID. So it was just kind of interesting for me to see that. And it's clearly the decrease in call volume for 2020 can clearly be pointed back to these 3 months, April, May, and June of 2020. This is just the same kind of table in a different way, so I'm going to skip past that, but I will show you this. These are our 8 fire stations, and Station 1 is on Carrillo Street. Station 1 down in the hub of Santa Barbara, 2,677 unique incidents. Now, this is unique incidents. This is one call, okay? So it's really important to understand that one incident could be a medical call or it could be a structure fire. If it's a medical call, it's handled by 1 engine. If it's a structure fire, it's handled by 4. This is the number of incidents. So when you see 2,600 calls, that would not include, say, engine 1 responding up to fire station 6's area for a structure fire. So these are actual singular incidents. So you can see that Station 1 is by far the busiest downtown. Station 2 is on the Lower East Side, Milpas and Cassique. Station 3, Upper East Side, 400 West Sola Street. Station 4 is on the north end on North Ontaire. Station 5 is next to Coomber Junior High School on Modoc. Station 6 is on Cliff Drive. Station 7 is up on the Riviera, Stanwood Drive. And Station 8 is at the airport. And of course, we'd love to have at the bottom, by the way, would be calls handled by, say, a fire investigator. Let's say police called and said they had found evidence of a fire and they wanted a fire investigator to respond. That investigator responded, generated a fire report, and that would be where those numbers come from. So you'll see that really the majority of our calls are handled by the 6 stations. Station 7 has a low call volume, but they also respond. It's very critical that they're up there for the wildland urban interface. The calls that they do respond to tend to be very significant. They go up to Gibraltar Road for vehicles over the side. They have a lot of bicycle accidents in their area. And then Station 8, thankfully at the airport, is our lowest by far. And I always say that's just great. I would love for them to run no calls, especially when I'm flying. So they did have 37 calls. This gets a little scattered, but this just kind of shows by month which stations are responding to what calls, et cetera. And then this really looks at, and I'll go down to the bottom here. This looks at what's, you'll see a different number, 14,000. This equates for what we call unit movement, okay? This goes back to that point where I said 1 fire engine responds to a medical, but 3 fire engines, a ladder truck, and a battalion chief respond to a structure fire. That's 5 unit movements. So you can see that at the bottom, we had 14,000 unit movements. So that means 14,000 fire apparatus were responding to calls in the city of Santa Barbara. So that's pretty much the overview of the report. It does get into the days of the week and the months. It does get into the times. I will show you that our busiest time is around between 4 and 6 o'clock at night. You'll see that we have, we stay pretty busy up till about 11 o'clock at night. Then you'll see around midnight that our call volume goes down to a low between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. But I will say this, and Commissioner Allman can attest to this. The calls at 3 o'clock in the morning are often the most significant. They're the sickest people. the fires may get a good running start on us and maybe a very well-involved structure fire. So while there's fewer incidents, we typically go to very significant incidents in the middle of the night. So that's kind of a rundown, and that's just another graph looking at it the same way. I know it's being put into the minutes, and I'll take my screen off so you can see me again. Looks like you can see me. And so that's just a general overview of the year in review for 2020. I'll take any questions.
No, not really a question, but clarification. So based on that 14,000 divided by 365 days, it sounds like there are 38 units per day. Does that work? Wow, that's
Sure.
busy. That's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. It is. Commissioner Rodriguez, you're absolutely right. You know, so if you think of it, 71% of the time, I mean, let's just look very simply at it. 71% of the time, our engines are responding, you know, a single engine to a medical. You know, a smoke in a building, a gas leak, you know, a gas leak inside a building, a gas leak outside the building. But that's, you bring up a great point, but I'm going to even add to that, because in some of the outlying areas of the city, say up in the upper Riviera, say out toward outer State Street, we get county and Montecito Fire that respond with us. So those units aren't being as recorded as accurately in this document as I mean, you will see them, but that's not completely accurate. But you're right. Yeah, about 40 times a day, our rigs are moving around town on incidents.
Wow. Well, great job. That's a lot to manage, and then doing so on without the updated call direction system. So kind of like the Uber of emergency calls, being able to know exactly where the call's coming from versus and then sending the trucks closest to that area. I forget what that's called, but Chief Nichols was talking about that earlier on. So yeah, great work. Thank you for that report.
Thank you. Yeah, your confusion is warranted because we use about 10 different names for it. So and you bring up Uber and that's completely relevant. It's basically GPS based dispatch. So I had a meeting this morning, and we're hoping that our capital improvement plan is approved, and we will begin to do the research and work to dispatch our apparatus by GPS rather than by fixed districts. And we did throw a bunch of different other abbreviations out only to confuse everyone. So I like to stick to GPS because most people know GPS. So yeah, we will be transitioning to that, and we can look at much better response times in the city. The apparatus will be grabbed based on their geolocation, and the three closest, or if it's a structure fire, the three closest fire engines will be sent no matter where they are. If they're close, period, they go. So it'll be a change, but it'll be great for us. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you answered the question that I had. I mean, the GPS system that the vice chair brought up, that directly impacts the response time and also the turnout time and sort of everything along that line, that chain of metrics, right? So did we really have any like egregious, like off the chart numbers in any of those columns for call processing or turnout time or travel time?
Chair Stedman, this annual report doesn't drill into turnout times and travel time. This is more about the responses. Our monthly reports get down into the weeds, if you will, with turnout time, travel time, on-scene time, that kind of thing. We do have outliers every once in a while. Things do happen. A station alert doesn't go off, the crew doesn't hear it, something like that. They're very few and far between, especially when since we've gone to this automated alerting system. More likely, when we see what we call an outlier, It's like, wow, that took 10 minutes for that fire engine to get there. Perhaps not. Perhaps they just didn't hit the button that they were on scene. That's way more likely.
Right.
And so we do have those outliers. The thing about this statistician that we're using is they take out those outliers. They take out the 1 second response time. It's like, well, how did they get there in 1 second? They take out it took them 20 minutes to get there. That's probably an outlier and probably a CAD error. So they really kind of drill down into the 90th percentile and look at the majority of the times and how do we fall. Overall, as I've shared with you, our firefighters get out the door very quickly. They travel as quickly and safely as possible. And we arrive on the scene around 6 to 7 minutes, which is very much average for a municipal department.
One other question, I don't know if it's off subject, but recently there was a joint exercise that involved the harbor patrol as well, right? So can you talk a little bit about that joint exercise and the coordination of our resources?
Chair Stedman and Commissioners, absolutely. I went back when I started talking about the Loma fire, and I said it takes a village. Our city departments work so well together, and our allied agencies in the community work well together. To go back to your question, we did an offshore water rescue drill that involved the fire department, harbor patrol, and Coast Guard. We're very fortunate, by the way, to have a Coast Guard helicopter stationed out of Port Hueneme, which is just a few minutes away from Santa Barbara, which is excellent. Our closest used to be out of LAX, and they've since put a helicopter, a Dolphin, at Port Hueneme. So they are eager to train with us. And so the drill that you're asking about was an ocean rescue drill where we used not only the Coast Guard, not only Harbor Patrol, we used our firefighters, and we're also fortunate. I would say we're a smaller department, but we're mighty. We have ocean rescue swimmers. We have certified United States Lifeguard Association ocean rescue swimmers. And if you see some of our fire trucks, people always go, oh, that's a great surfboard you got on top of your, it's not a surfboard, it's a paddleboard for rescue. So I always correct people because we're not surfing on duty, but if you get caught out in a rip current, we've got a paddleboard for you. So we have, I believe the number is 18, it ebbs and flows, but we have, I believe around 18 ocean rescue swimmers that are certified to go out, and we've used them numerous times. So we keep paddle boards on all of our coastal engines. So Station 2, Engine 72, Engine 76 on the Mesa, Engine 75 on Modoc, and Engine 71, they all have paddle boards. And what we do is, because we have 18 ocean rescue swimmers, they're stationed all over the city. They may be at Station 4 for the day. And so what our battalion chief does is when an ocean rescue call comes down, they'll amend the response and they'll say, cancel this engine, but send this engine. And the reason why they are, you'll very often hear that what they're doing is they've got the daily lineup and they know where the ocean rescue swimmers are. And so they'll grab that engine and bring them down. All of our personnel are trained to set up for an ocean rescue, but we don't send everyone in. They really need to be certified to get into the ocean. So we will set up the paddleboard, we'll set up the rescue equipment. En route to the call, the rescue swimmer will don their wetsuit and be in the water in a matter of moments after arrival. Depending on where the incident is, they may get on a harbor patrol boat, but that multi-agency drill that night was an offshore water rescue drill. So it's great for our folks to actually get out there. You get underneath the helicopter, on a boat, in the water at night, it's a different story.
Right. No, it was great. I loved seeing it.
Yeah,
it's excellent.
It's impressive. And I've got to tell you, the Coast Guard is an absolutely amazing agency to work with. Their pilots are so, I've had an opportunity to work with them a couple of times, and we've had a couple of offshore water rescues, and having that airship above with, Coast Guard is a luxury for us. And it's great to have them so quick and able to respond.
Excellent, excellent. Love hearing that. Any other questions from the commission? That was a great report, Chief.
Thank you.
So
I
much
went
data.
longer than Chief Malekian, but I wanted to make sure that you had a good idea with what happened with the Loma fire. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
No, it was fantastic. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chief.
You're welcome. Thank you all for being here too.
All right, guys, commission. So let's move on to new business. Now, do we want to reiterate this letter that you mentioned, Vice Chair, right now as new business? We're going to move that forward.
I don't think it's a letter quite yet because I think we need to talk about and then vote in order to, it needs to be agendized, but I think just having more clarity that maybe Commissioner Allman can work with Chief Males and get more clarity on what we're proposing to support, and maybe that second one of a proactive plan, wildlife plan, and maybe that might be too big of a budget item. It sounds like that's what he was saying, but and see how much he would like to see that fire prevention position back. So
Sure. Well, I think it's a great idea. I think prior to you joining the commission, this methodology, getting attention through the council and reaching into to impact the budget for the translator, I thought was pretty good yeoman's work. So this type of action by the commission, I think, is really what we meet for at least once a month. So that's a good idea. And so we want to get that on the agenda then, right? A new business, let's get that on the agenda.
Yeah, I'll be meeting with him soon, and we've got to get that ball rolling now, at least the mechanics of it, and then we'll move on.
No, that's great, Commissioner Allman. I mean, everything that you can do, and you work so well with the fire department. We're really lucky to have you on the commission. So thank you for moving that along.
Well, I feel lucky to be able to do that. It was hard to break away, just cut the ties, so I'm glad to be available for that. And I really like working with Chief Males and of course all the other staff. So
Good. Well, it shows. So we appreciate it. Are there any other matters of new business for item 11 from any of the commissioners? Okay. Let's move on to 12, item 12, staff communications. Vice Chair, did you want to say anything?
Sure. So the Community Formation Commission met, I think it was 2 weeks ago. We'll be meeting the second Wednesday of the month, I believe. And we're still in our forming stage. Last meeting, we voted to hire a consultant from NACOL, the National Association for Community Oversight and Law Enforcement. So they'll be helping to facilitate our meetings and help educate us as well. We also self-selected small working groups so we can do research on maybe like data and stats, and then another group is working on looking at communities similar to Santa Barbara that has oversight commissions and what that looked like, and just doing a bunch of homework so that we can come back and educate each other.
That's awesome. And are you involved at all with that recent $500,000 request for funding of the cultural center, or is that completely separate?
That's completely separate. It's that was led by Healing Justice, and it was for a Black cultural center to develop that space. And I believe that money, the $500,000, was going to go towards rent for several years. But no, that was not me. That was Healing Justice.
Right, but I mean, it's not an item that's being discussed at the formation commission. Okay,
No.
great. Excellent, excellent report. Any other staff communication? Commissioner Travis Teague, did you have anything that you wanted to share?
No, not at this time. We will hopefully have some information on training for the commission at the next meeting.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Anything, Commissioner, anything more, Commissioner Allman? I think your plate's kind of full right now. So,
Yeah, it'll fill up, it'll fill up. I'm happy to be part of it. I know I was involved in a promotional activity yesterday at the fire department for battalion chief, and that went well. But that was rewarding because it's an important thing to fill those slots. You get them moved up the line. So, but I have nothing else.
great. I don't either. I'm surfeited. We've had a paucity of data and discussion at this meeting, so it's definitely a lot to consider walking away after adjournment. But I appreciate everyone's participation, and as I said, I'm noting the cohesion. So we may not always agree on every detail, but I think there is some cohesion that I see in the commission, and I hope the public appreciates that as well. And I want to thank our staff. Of course, Carol does just all behind the scenes mostly, but she does a great job, and we really appreciate our city attorney staff always being on the ready. So thanks a lot, John. Okay.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we much appreciated. And the camera angle's better this week or this month. So
It is.
one last month was awesome. All right. So if there are no further staff communications for item 12, we will move to item 13. If there's a motion, we can take it right now.
I move that we adjourn, Commissioner Stedman.
Okay. Is there a second for that?
A second.
All right. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, perfect. Motion for adjournment carries unanimously. So thank you very much. Thank the public too. We'll see you guys very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.